Hi everyone! Welcome to the new episode of the Prime View, series of interviews with top business and technology leaders. Recently I had the pleasure to interview Matthew Fornaciari, co-founder and CTO of Gremlin, a company that built a robust chaos engineering platform to help enterprises across the globe with their infrastructure and systems reliability. In the interview, we talked about some of the common misconceptions about chaos engineering and about the problems chaos engineering helps to solve to enterprises. We also talked about the interesting case of JP Morgan Chase and Gremlin, where Gremlin helped the financial institution to automate compliance. Also, we talked about the latest update to Gremlin's platform, where their services are going to be treated as first-class citizen. It's a great interview, and I hope you will enjoy it. And if you will, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned. Well, Matt, I would be really keen to know, how did your experience as an engineer at Amazon impact your decision to start a chaos engineering company?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I think a lot of folks go and work at Amazon and learn a whole lot about the way that systems operate, especially at scale, and then take some of that knowledge and go out into the world and do interesting things with it. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's ultimately the story of what both myself and my co-founder Colton did. Is we worked at Amazon from 2010 to about 2013. The company had just gone through a huge migration from this giant monolith to microservices. And as it turns out, you make that migration, a whole bunch of new things break in new ways that you've never really seen before. And so we actually, I like to say that we learned a lot of trial by fire, but we learned a lot of really interesting things about systems at scale and operating systems at scale. I mean, at that time, the Amazon retail website was largely the moneymaker. AWS was really in its nascency still. And so the retail website, when it went down, it was all hands on deck. Everybody, was paged into a conference bridge, and you really got to see and dig into some really interesting ways that things fail. Colton and I were both lucky in the sense that we both got to be on the call leader rotation, which is a pretty elite group of folks at Amazon. It's kind of what SRE was before there was SRE. This was a lot more of let's go debug all the different ways that things are failing. And so we got to see a lot of really interesting ways that systems can crumble, and that, these assumptions that we have as engineers, they don't always hold true. And so we decided to take that knowledge and really build it into not only a tool, not only a product, but a company and a practice. The idea of chaos engineering is it's really the practice of going out and proactively sussing out all of these failures before they bite you in production, before they affect your customers. Because at the end of the day, last place you want to find out about bugs and about downtime is at the customer level. You want to catch these things in staging and development long before that. And so the practice of chaos engineering, it's not new at all. It actually, it goes way back to cave people days when we'd stick something in our mouth and be like, oh, that didn't taste very, it's all testing. It's all trying to go out and proactively suss these things out. But, in terms of computing, I think it all, at least my knowledge, goes back to a guy named Jesse Robbins, who his nickname is the Master of Disaster. He was at Amazon long before me. He used to run through data centers and just pull cables out of the wall. So Colton and I built something there that did that a little bit more safely. And eventually we realized that, this was the secret sauce in a lot of these companies, that this was happening behind closed door in silos at Google, at Amazon, at Facebook, these big companies. We realized that this was a practice that was going to be democratized, was going to be given to the masses, was going to be something that, ultimately drove this road to reliability that a lot of customers are on the journey to. And so we figured if somebody was going to build this, it may as well be us. We were pretty much experts in the space, as close as you can get, and figured that this was a practice that we wanted to really bring to the masses and really democratize.
Wow, that is quite interesting. Gremlin is pioneering the practice of chaos engineering, and most of our listeners, I believe, are familiar with the term. But can you explain what it is really all about from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. I think chaos engineering, I'll take it a little bit higher level than just what the product and solution is first. Chaos engineering in and of itself, like I mentioned, is a practice. I think the name is a little bit of a misnomer. I think Chaos Monkey almost did a disservice to chaos engineering by just sort of randomly throwing chaos. Like, that's not what chaos engineering is. Chaos engineering is very dedicated, very specific testing where you inject chaos, you inject failures, but it's not chaotic testing. It's very scientific. You approach it with a hypothesis, you approach it with acceptance criteria, rejection criteria. You're trying to validate or reject the assumptions that you have about your system. And so that's just one thing I always try to dispel whenever I get to talk about chaos engineering is it's not just randomly chaos. I think eventually you can get there, and that's ultimately the goal, is to have this continuous chaos running in the background and make sure all these remediation methods and all these assumptions you have hold true, even as the underlying system is changing. But what Gremlin offers is a way to really build out that practice and to really build out the muscle around chaos engineering in terms of a scientific method. We have this primitive called a scenario. And what it really is you give it a name, you give it a description, then you set a hypothesis, and then you set your testing mechanism. So very similar to the scientific method. Then you go run those things and you observe to see what happens. So, there's a lot of tie-in to monitoring pieces. We tie in with, Datadog, New Relic, a bunch of these other things, other monitoring tools that are out there in the world to determine whether or not your experiment was actually successful. And I think that's the key differentiator between, I think, what a lot of people kind of naively have a semblance of what chaos engineering is versus, what the actual practice is. And so Gremlin really gives you a safe, simple, and secure way to go about running these experiments in the real world, in production, in staging, in development, wherever it is you want to go out and validate your assumptions about your system.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to know. How do you convince new clients who aren't aware of chaos engineering concepts that they actually need it? Do you see any misunderstanding of this concept?
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well. I think there has been a lot of organic growth in demand for this. I think folks are pretty well aware of what chaos engineering is at this point. And I think the thing that we're really working to help customers understand is that it's not chaos for the sake of chaos. It's chaos in the name of reliability. It's chaos in the name of improving your reliability, your uptime, creating a better experience for your customers, and making sure that they're using chaos as a tool and not just creating chaos for the sake of chaos. In fact, early days, we would talk to this probably five years ago, we would talk to executives and they'd be like, I have plenty of chaos already. What do I need? What do I need you for? And I think that mentality has really evolved a lot to the point where it's, okay, chaos is going to happen one way or another. We want it to be controlled. We want it to be on, our time. And one of the things we usually say is like, look, do you want to try to be figuring out these failure modes at 3 a.m. when you've just been woken up by a page, or do you want to try to solve these at 3 p.m. when you're well caffeinated, you've got the whole team, eyes on glass, sitting there? And so it's a paradigm shift, I think, from this whole reactive culture that we've had in terms of operations, where it's great, I give you a pager. And in fact, back at Amazon, when they gave me my own team eventually, it's called the Fatals team, but they were like, cool, here's a pager, good luck. And it was very reactive. It was very much whatever you build, you own, you should build it well because you don't want to get paged at 3 a.m, but it was very reactive still. And this is much more of a transition to the proactive, to going out there and finding these things before they become problems, before they cause downtime, before they lose your company money. And I think that's become better and better understood. And I think we've done a lot, to educate, and some of our other counterparts in the space have done a lot to educate that as well. But it's certainly become much, much better understood.
So actually we can say that chaos engineering actually prepares enterprises for any possible failures in advance.
And I think that's also partially driven by, the technological, the patterns we've seen in moving towards microservices and moving towards cloud-based hosting operations. We've also just seen a general change in sentiment of the public. Like, downtime is just not really acceptable anymore. It used to be very much so that like, it'd be cool, we've got a scheduled window, downtime window, scheduled maintenance window. During that time, our services will not be available. And that just isn't really acceptable from especially big name companies, but from about everything that you get on the internet these days. The expectation is that you are always up, always available, and there's always a good customer experience. And frankly, like if there isn't, people have pretty good avenues to make sure that it's visible that they are having a bad experience with your product and don't hesitate to. So it's beyond just losing money. There's also, the concept of brand defamation. There's pager fatigue, pager pain. There's a whole bunch of different things that have really come into prominence over the past that have really driven this move towards the proactive from the reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not imagine any company that would want to be affected by failures or downtime that would actually cause some damage to user experience for their clients or their customers.
No, absolutely not. Or can't book a flight, or can't any of those kind of things are just, they're not commonplace anymore.
It's interesting. Recently I heard Gremlin is making a major update to its platform and now treating services as a first-class citizens. Can you explain this decision and how it relates to the rise of clouds and DevOps?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, you have heard right. We are making a big move. We're making services our first-class citizen. And really, the primary motivating factor is to meet our customers where they are. And with these transitions, these moves to the cloud, to service-based, service-oriented architectures or microservices as it's more commonly known, our customers think about their architecture, about their systems in terms of services. They don't necessarily think about it about the underlying infrastructure, how it's running. Oftentimes they think more about, okay, it's this particular service, whether that be identity or cart or whatever it is that your product is. They think about it in terms of these little bits of functionality that operate independently. And so we wanted to meet our customers where they were and really drive this paradigm shift so that customers don't have to think about, okay, what host do I need to run this attack on in order to affect, services A, B, and C. Instead, they can just go straight to Gremlin, look at services A, B, and C, and run attacks directly on those without the additional cognitive load of having to understand, okay, this is running in Kubernetes, but this one runs in EC2 on Amazon. Oh boy, this one's in GCP. How do I span all of these things? It's not necessarily how they think about their infrastructure, about their systems. And so we wanted to make sure that we met them where they were in that regard. We wanted to make sure that we were replicating their mental model in Gremlin and giving them a home base for each of these services from a reliability standpoint, giving them the ability to tie in their different mechanisms that they need, the observability tools, being able to pull in and actually see all of the attacks run on that particular service, regardless of whether or not the containers that make it up have come and gone, whatever it is, and then be able to track those over time and track the reliability of those services over time, regardless of where they're hosted or how they're operating.
So why is there a higher demand for your solution? Is it because of COVID-19 and that lots of organizations are working from home and there might be a higher vulnerability to their infrastructure and their systems? Or it's a general trend in technology world where most companies are transitioning and moving to the cloud?
I don't know if it's just the lockdown, but I know that, our world has just become much more online in the past year and a half. I think what I always hear is, COVID-19, the pandemic has really been a great accelerant, right? It's really moved a lot of these things these trends that were already in place. It's just made them move much, much quicker. And so a lot of our customers are folks that maybe weren't seeing as much online activity, but now are seeing huge amounts. And so they're dealing with scaling issues. They're not able to get the kind of hardware they need immediately if they're running on-prem. And so they're starting to experiment with cloud-based services. And I think the move towards microservices has been not necessarily accelerated by this per se, but has definitely been a trend that we've seen accelerate in the past 10 years. It's really become one of those things that, because engineers and product and software needs to move so much quicker, it just makes it much easier to be able to deploy in smaller smaller bits and be able to move those things out there. So there's a lot of trends that are contributing to this, and I think we're pretty well positioned to help folks get up to speed on reliability, regardless of where they're hosting, what they're doing. We are cloud agnostic. We don't care where you're running stuff. We just want to help you make it more reliable.
Well, at the Prime View, we tend to talk about innovations and digital transformations in different industries. We had several guests from financial industry, and they specifically said that the industry is lagging behind many other industries in innovations, in adopting innovative approaches. But also on your website, in the cases that you shared with publicly, I could see that Gremlin helped JP Chase to automate compliance. So while there's that perception that large financial organizations might be somewhat resilient to innovative approaches, what is your vision on that, right? And maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on this case and the benefits delivered to JP Chase by Gremlin?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for asking, for pointing that out. I think JP Chase is definitely one of the more forward-leaning banks in terms of technology. But we've seen a lot of trends from financial firms in general. There's a certain sort of compliance that these companies need to have. And I think there's varying levels of, how bad it is to have downtime. Banks and money, probably some of the worst. And so actually we've seen quite a bit of adoption there. I think what you had mentioned is, sometimes these larger corporations can be resilient to change. And I think it's funny that the word resilient means something very different to me. It means, being able to withstand some of these failures and whatnot. So like what I think of is sometimes they're resistant to change. They're not willing to come adopt these sort of technologies. But what we've really seen is a lot of these companies, a lot of these banks especially, leaning into being more reliable. They're much more amenable to being able to withstand different failure modes, especially as we've seen this increased trend towards online and to cloud-based solutions. And so for JP Chase in particular, we're being built into their compliance mechanisms and really into what we would call like an operational maturity model. And so it's for this baseline of things that, for rolling out a new service or for moving to the cloud, you need to pass, experiments X, Y, and Z. And it's not just you have to pass them one time, you have to automate them so that you are continuously validating that you are resilient to these sort of failure modes. And that's things like host and node failure. So if a host or node dies, then it spins back up. If, there is a shutdown in one of the regions in the cloud, that you automatically shift traffic over to the other one, and a couple of other like failure modes that have been really part of their baseline. And then as you get further along, they layer in more and more experiments that you become resilient to. And so you eventually, at least with what we've been doing with JPMCs, we've been building out a library of failure modes that they're resilient to. And as their services move from on-prem up to the cloud, they're passing this bar. They're being put through the gauntlet, through this test to basically make sure that they are resilient to X, Y, and Z before they're able to run in production in the cloud, so that they suss out all of these failure modes before customers even get a chance to touch the technology. So it's been a really cool experience and a really cool partnership to work with them. Like I said, they're pretty forward leaning, but there's some other folks out there, and especially in the FinServ area, that are on similar paths, that are really leaning into this whole idea of reliability and making sure that everything is battle tested before it hits production. What we want to do is just meet customers where they are and be able to give them at least a little bit of some guidance in terms of like, how can you, even if you got an hour to spend a week or something like that, how can we help you build some more reliability into your systems? So there's just, obviously the big banks, enterprises, they're definitely leaning in, but there's an offering for everyone with Gremlin. There's something we can do for just about every stage of the company lifecycle.
Yeah, one of the last questions that I have for you is, what do you see in the future for Gremlin? Can you give us a sense where you hope to take the company over the next 5 years?
Yeah, another great question. So I mean, you'll probably notice we started off the conversation talking a little bit about chaos engineering, but towards the end of the conversation, we talked a lot more about reliability. I think reliability is really the long-term goal, and I don't think I know reliability is the long-term goal of Gremlin. You know, one of the things we've really identified with is chaos engineering is an amazing tool, but it is only one tool in the reliability tool belt. And so being able to integrate with different solutions that provide a much more robust reliability experience. And ultimately what we want to do, the reason customers hire Gremlin, like I mentioned earlier, is not to create more chaos. They got plenty of that. The world is chaotic enough as we've seen over the past year. They hire Gremlin to help them become more reliable. And I think there's a lot of different vectors that we can go out and really improve our product, our offering, be able to provide more guidance to our customers. Really, silly. I joke sometimes, like automate the operations out of DevOps, so that folks can get back to like development, what really makes them money, and so they don't have to worry as much about what do I need to do to operate these systems reliably. They can just focus on developing new product, new software, things that are going to provide their customers with an even better experience. And so that's the direction. We're going to make things more reliable. We're going to do it, one step at a time here and there, but really providing guidance to the wider world and, adhering to our mission of building a more reliable internet.
Yeah, Matt, thanks so much for your time and for your insights. I actually see a great future ahead of you and the whole Gremlins team, and I look forward to see what comes out next.